We'll get started here. Thank you. Okay, so Cheryl introduced me a little bit. I'm the head of education here at Beckley Academy. I'm a longtime educator. A little bit about myself. I first worked with students with learning differences as an educator for many years. In the past 12 years, I have been lucky enough to work in this field of professional development and psychotherapy, first with Sensory Motor Psychotherapy Institute and now with Beckley Academy. I'm particularly passionate about the neuroscience of learning, particularly the significance of social engagement in learning and the parallels between learning and therapy. And some of this we'll have a chance to speak about today in our talk. So the theme of today's conversation is threading the needle, preparation and relationship in psychedelic-assisted therapy. We hear a lot about integration in this field, and today we'll explore the significance of preparation in therapeutic outcomes with two experienced PAT therapists, Danielle and Karina, who are both Beckley Academy faculty and who are two of my favorite people to work with. So we'll take a moment for introductions, and we'll start with Danielle if you want to go ahead and say a few words.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming this morning or afternoon or evening, depending on time zone. I'm Danielle. I'll do a quick intro. I like to start with sort of naming some of my interests or hats or identities that are less clinical and letters after your last name. So first and foremost, I'm a daughter, I'm a sister, I'm an auntie. That's my favorite part right now. He's 5 years old. I'm a Sufi mystic. I love poetry. I'm really finding myself just sort of exploring all aspects of loving, and how I've found myself professionally is loving for a living, as I like to say. And how that's taken form is in the role of a psychedelic psychotherapist. So currently I'm a ketamine assisted psychotherapist in private practice. I've worked with, I recently transitioned from Sage Integrative Health in Berkeley, California. I'm in Oakland, California on Ohlone land. And I think about the work I do as drugs full spectrum. So I'm a trained harm reduction psychotherapist. I work with drug users who are having a more chaotic relationship to drugs. And then I like to work with psychedelic integration and psychedelic therapy for folks who are using drugs in ways that offer them like an altered state of consciousness towards spiritual emergence. So that's a general gist of the work that I do. And being here at Beckley has been one of my favorite roles so far. Hand it over to Karina.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. It's so lovely to be able to be with you today. Thank you, Danielle. Danielle is always such a good reminder of the important aspects of relationships before we name what we do professionally. So I will do the same. I am a mother to 3 beautiful adult, amazing boys, young men now. I am a daughter, I'm a sister, I'm a friend, I'm a partner, and I'm a student of life, a student of divinity, and a student of the relationships of the world. Professionally, I am a licensed psychotherapist. I'm an educator and clinical researcher. I've been providing psychotherapy for over 18 years in a variety of settings. Because of my deep interest and dedication to being a student of divinity and spirituality, I made a pivot in my professional life about 6 years ago and started to professionally train to become a psychedelic assisted therapist. And I've had the privilege of training in the use of several different medicines, including ketamine and MDMA, LSD, 5-MeO DMT, psilocybin, and ayahuasca. I'm currently a senior clinical program psychotherapist at Pacific Neuroscience Institute in Los Angeles. There, I get to facilitate psychedelic medicine sessions using psilocybin and LSD, ketamine, and very soon 5-MeO DMT. And I also train and supervise therapists who are delivering ketamine-assisted psychotherapy in different clinical settings. And again, have a deep interest in the use of these medicines as spiritual sacraments for the world. I also have a private practice that I keep in Los Angeles. And, before I am any of these things, I am really focused on my relationships. So even in psychotherapy, I'm a relational therapist. And I believe that relationships are really the most important way for us to live and to heal. Thank you for being here.
Thank you both so much. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. So we're talking about preparation today. In the field, we hear so much about integration, so much so that there's even a special therapy, integration therapy, that's emerged as people are working with psychedelics. I would love to hear from both of you. Why should we care about what we're calling sort of shifting the discussion towards preparation, or really what's the right balance, in preparation and integration? And why don't we start with Danielle?
Yeah, there's so much we could say about this topic. I do feel like the topic of integration gets a lot more buzz than the topic of preparation. And preparation is what prepares you for great integration. In the work that I do, if anything, I'm extending the shape of the preparation container to really fine tune, gather data, get to know, deepen the rapport with the client so that you have the material you can work with in a medicine session, and then you have that material you can work with in integration. As kind of like Karina was saying, and similarly, I work very relationally. My orientation is primarily like Jungian depth psychotherapy, which really values a long-term trusting dynamic towards growth. So when you apply that with psychedelic therapy, and you're really highlighting that aspect of psychedelic assisted therapy. So there's a psychotherapy aspect, and you're kind of leaning on that relationship being the primary part of the healing. Another piece that comes up here for me is that psychedelic therapy is relational in the sense that you have the client and the therapist being in relationship, but once you add that medicine, you're in like a triadic or quadratic relationship, no longer a dyadic, and the therapist has a relationship to the medicine, the therapist and client have a relationship to the medicine. There's a lot of interpersonal dynamics occurring, and all of that deserves a lot of attention.
Yeah, thank you so much, Danielle. And Karina, how about you?
Yeah, beautiful, Danielle. So preparation is really it's the last stop before a medicine session. And so we want to make sure that the participant feels safe and feels ready to move into what may be the most novel and exciting experience of their life. An experience certainly that we hope is transformative. And so before we move into something so sacred and important, we want to make sure that the person feels properly prepared. What we know from anecdotal evidence and from some of the clinical research that's emerging is that participants are actually naming the preparation session as the most profound and impactful part of the experience. And that's kind of counterintuitive. We would expect that it's actually the medicine session. But people talk about the importance of having built trust and rapport and safety and coming into the proper mindset, learning about intention, setting intention and intentionality in these preparation sessions. And what we know about all of these things is that these are incredibly important and predictive of positive treatment outcomes. And so if we're doing all of these things, establishing a healthy relationship, helping people set intentions and really prepare for something big, we're actually teaching them how to do that in their regular life as well. And so, we'll talk a lot about the details of preparation sessions, but these are a couple of reasons why preparation is so important.
Yeah, thank you. And you've really outlined a lot of what we'll be diving deeper into here. I would love to hear from both of you what a typical preparation session process looks like, the timeline, how many sessions, the kind of elements of each session, and then a lot of those pieces we'll dive into a little more deeply. And Danielle, why don't we go to you?
Sure. Yeah. So the word typical is an interesting one because of how client-centered this aspect of psychedelic assisted therapy is. So, but to speak to some of the shaping of the logistical framework that we'll use in a psychedelic session is, at least when I was at Sage Integrative Health, the way that we thought about it was at least two, more like 3 preparation sessions prior to the client going into a psychedelic assisted session. I was always expanding that. And reason why was because I just noticed that it was a deeper experience if you had a longer relationship. And preference would be that those folks who were having that medicine session were actually longer term psychotherapy clients prior to the medicine session. Higher outcomes is just sort of across the board. So for a typical preparation session, I would say like I'm more comfortable with literally the longer the better is kind of how it comes out. And in those sessions, you're doing traditional psychotherapy, right? Which in my framework is a lot very relational, very like very systemic, right? But then you're tending to the like intentions for the session. So you're like really thinking about like, how are we going to shape the container for you to best access the depth of the psychedelic assisted session. So a lot of that does mean like thinking about like taking an inventory of their life to see like, do they have the capacity to tolerate what might come up in the psychedelic assisted session? And that comes down to like very basic things, like when they go home and integrate, do they have like a quiet room do they live with people who will understand and not stigmatize the psychedelic journey? Do they, what is their like safety plan? Do they have somebody to call in case of a crisis happens? Do they not have like a chaotic work schedule where they can't take a full integration day to go on a hike? It's a lot of these like logistical pieces. I'll pause there. There's a lot more to it, but I'd love to just bounce off what Karina says.
Thank you, Danielle. So like Danielle, my preference would be that I have a long-standing relationship with the person that I'm entering a medicine session with. My preference would be that we would have been in relationship for several months, if not years. Mm-hmm. Obviously, what we know is that because of the limitations of medicine work in the US, at least right now, that's not often the case. It could sometimes be the case with ketamine work as it is, we are allowed to use it off label in the US. So my preference would be that we have at least 2, if not 3 formal preparation sessions in which we get to a place in which we both feel like we're ready to move into the medicine session. I don't think anybody, especially somebody who is psychedelic naive, is 100% prepared and ready to move into a medicine session. But to the extent that we can get what I call a sacred yes. In other words, we've reviewed all of the material, we've answered as many questions as we can, and the person can look at me and tell me I'm ready to do this with you tomorrow or in a few days. So if you think about preparation, you can really think about the preparation session being an orientation. We want to orient the participant to the experience, and that can be as simple as orienting them to the room, to the music that they're going to be listening to. We want to make sure that they understand the process in general. They understand, in some cases, the course of treatment. Do they know the staff that they'll be working with? Make sure that they know the facilitators. If I'm working with the co-facilitator, that they're familiar with the co-facilitator. They know the other clinicians in the clinic. Perhaps the medical doctor that is on board, and understand the roles of these folks, that they understand the signature of the medicine. Each medicine has its own signature. And so, can I give them some information around that? And we can maybe talk about the different signatures of medicine later today. Do they understand the general arc of the experience? Do they know how this medicine behaves over time? And we want to talk about some of the expected and potential unexpected experiences or side effects that they may experience during the medicine session, some of the physical or physiological effects, perhaps some of the potential benefits of having this experience. Why are they doing this? So we're reviewing what to do if there's difficulty, if there's discomfort that arises. We're discussing intention. And then, finally, we're discussing aftercare instructions and making sure that they have a safe place to land after their medicine session.
Yeah, thank you both so much. And one of the things I'd like to dive a little deeper into now is really that therapeutic relationship and container building and building that trust, because you both touched on, this reality, especially in the Western medical model, and this shows up in clinical trials and it shows up in clinical protocols, is that there's a set amount of preparation time sort of built into those, which is often, as you both noted, not necessarily the ideal. So what kind of tips do you have for folks who for folks who don't have the luxury of having the ideal amount of preparation time? What are your tips for building trust, or your tips for opening the container? And Danielle, why don't we start with you?
Yeah. Tips for building trust and opening a container. You're letting, when that is the case and somebody doesn't have that luxury of like meeting for months or years, you're really having the conversation of like, you get as much of this, you get out of this as much as you put in, and letting somebody know that you would idealize this container being longer, but that you're limited. And so when that's the case, and oftentimes this has to do with, just how much it costs to do a psychedelic package, I'll really try to deepen with a client by like having them do a lot of like outside therapy work that is still very therapeutic. So sometimes that means like, bibliotherapy, like having them read certain books based off of like the thing that they're working on to sort of prime them for some of the material they may access, give them vocabulary for that. Just for example, I just did this because it was a client who who's coming in for the grief and loss of a sudden death of her husband. And we only had the option of doing 3 prep sessions. So I had her read The Wild Edge of Sorrow by Francis Weller. And it gave us the language that then when we were in session, I could refer to it, rather than me. Otherwise I would have said those in that year-long relationship as I would have liked to. That's an example. Other than that is like kind of offering them or assigning in a way, if they're open to it, rituals and ceremonies for them to get on practicing what they might experience in their psychedelic journey. So if that means like a regular practice of prayer or meditation, or like it could be a somatic practice, but it's something, or writing practice, it's something where they're sort of like feeling into that container of accessing the full range of their emotions from ecstasy to agony, and being with that, so that when that happens, as it likely will during a medicine session, there's a little bit more of an ability to tolerate that experience. Other pieces here is just like, I'll explain to my psychedelic clients that I'm like maybe being a little bit more challenging than I would if we were like a long-term therapy client dynamic, just in a way to sort of like, like there's something about like testing the dynamic early on, or just like feeling into the possibilities for rupture so that I can get into repair before we're in an altered state of consciousness. So there is a bit of that, and it's like tricky and difficult. But I've found that if you can get to like an opportunity for repair, or an opportunity for some crunchiness, some more of the difficult part of the dynamic before you get into the altered state, then you're going to have a lot of a much better time in that altered state. And those are a few that I could think of. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so great. I love that you've touched on some really practical things. So you're talking about preparatory practices like psychoeducation elements, or practices that folks can do at home if they don't have that luxury, right, of being in session with you, and also how to titrate that experience really to get the most out of that limited time. Karina, we'd love to hear from you.
My intention for preparation sessions, aside from getting that sacred yes, is really to build trust and rapport with the participant, but also to enable them to build trust and rapport with themselves. Because what we're about to do could be incredibly novel, and what we're hoping is that it's life-changing. And so in that, what I usually utilize is this kind of radical honesty and humanity with the participants that I work with. I want them to know that I'm human, and that I have my own life and concerns and medicine experiences myself. It helps people to feel safe in the room. And I want them to be able to use that radical honesty with me as well. How are they feeling about being in the room with me? How are we feeling about this kind of short-term relationship that we're building? Do you trust me? Do I trust you? Do we trust the medicine experience? So, trust, rapport, honesty, humanity. These are kind of my guideposts for the preparation session and opening the container.
Yeah, and you've really highlighted, and we talk about these things a lot in our course, the importance of vulnerability and transparency, right, in the facilitator. And you're really speaking to how you can sort of get deeply quickly with the client. So I'd love to talk a little bit more, and you've both talked about this a little bit. One of the things that you're helping clients do in preparation sessions is prepare for what they might experience. And the idea there is like, you don't want them to become overwhelmed by experience, but you want them to be able to deepen into that experience. So if you could each speak a little bit about how you help clients take inventory of the resources they have available to them, how you help them build resources, and what some of those resources, sort of typical resources, are, that would be fantastic. And either one of you can go first.
Yeah, I could jump in. Yeah, I'm thinking the window of tolerance comes up, and I'm really like gauging for just in all facets of an individual's life, like where do they sort of lose their center? Like, what's that scenario look like? And it's different for everybody, right? Everybody has different triggers. Everybody has different like touch points, where they sort of like destabilize. And I'm like finding that's like one of the client-centered parts of this work is like really like in that relational process is really like identifying, oh, this is something that this person is having a particularly difficult time with. So this is where our work is, and this is where like I need to be like extra aware of their needs and their attempts to obtain a different experience through our relationship. And when you're in that place, you're sort of like, you're doing a lot of it's like parts work and like reparenting work to kind of identify what is it that you need when you sort of feel like you're outside of that window of tolerance, and what doesn't work, what doesn't feel right, what's going to be actually like re-triggering or harmful, re-traumatizing even. And so you're kind of like playing in that shadowy realm. The other piece of this inventory is like really getting, I think it's like this Virgo quality. There's like a like literally making a spreadsheet of what their life looks like, right? Who, I'm like even thinking of a recent example, and I'm going to keep doing this because I feel like this is an easier way to digest some of this information. But I like made a mistake in one of my client sessions because I didn't take good inventory of like some of their family system and like, or the like who they're in relationships with. We were moving a little too fast. And before he came to his ketamine session, he got a phone call from his father, and his whole session was about his father. And it was like just realizing like, oh, like we needed to set a firm boundary on like when I wasn't aware that when dad calls, he's like falls into this like, like really kind of obsessive place, identifies dad as sort of like a narcissistic character. So the session was almost overwhelmed with like that role. And for the future, we're like, okay, we actually need to put like a firm boundary on like, on ketamine therapy days, we're not talking to dad, and we're not talking to dad on integration days either. So like playing with stuff like that, like what are the influences of the individual that includes like people in their life, that also includes everything else, and how to shape the experience so that it's like protected.
Yeah, and Karina?
I typically ask participants to define the term resources or resource for me, because I want to get an idea of what that means to them. And so, what we may do in session and typically at some point during preparation sessions, we review and we practice resourcing in the room in the event that there is extreme discomfort during the medicine session. So we may do a breathing exercise where we actually intentionally overstimulate the nervous system, so that we can practice therapeutic touch, we can practice proper breathing, we can practice listening to the music in the room and helping resource in that way. We can practice some grounding techniques. And so that's what happens inside of the room. Outside of the room, I'm asking them what resourcing means for them. How are they supported in the world? How do they support themselves? And because they may require this outside of the medicine session. So I'm asking, who are your support people? Who are the people that you love and trust and that love and trust you, that can be there for you? I may be asking them, something as simple and detailed as, where are you going to land at the end of the medicine session? What does the room look like? Do you have comfy pajamas ready for you? Do you have a nutritious meal? Who will be holding you that night? Who will be providing you supportive touch? And so we're really exploring the concept of support and resourcing, and that really helps me get to know the participant.
Yeah, thank you both. And you've really done a good job of looking at this concept of resourcing from an ecological systems perspective, where you have the somatic resources that the client has available to them. You have the co-regulation resources of the therapeutic container, and then all of these influences and resources available outside of that, like family systems, friends, bigger societal systems that are at play. So I really appreciate that you've both touched on that. I'd like to narrow down a little bit on therapeutic touch, because this is something that has a very powerful impact. There's also the great potential for harm in therapeutic touch. And I'd love to just hear a little bit from each of you about, how you negotiate touch with clients in preparation sessions. Maybe we'll start with you, Danielle.
This is the topic that I would say we can do like a whole series or longer on, and it still wouldn't be enough. It's the touch one. Yeah. So one of the biggest reasons why I think preparation needs to be much longer is because of the aspect of touch and psychedelic therapy having such intense potential for harm. Psychotherapists traditionally aren't necessarily trained as an expert in touch. Traditional talk therapy doesn't really include any of that. But psychedelic therapy sort of requires it in a way. Not, of course, like there's going to be clients where you never touch, but to be prepared for the client that does need that different experience of some very basic contact. And with that sort of like non-specific amplifier state of consciousness, touch that is very gentle and unobtrusive could actually feel very obtrusive if your preparation for it isn't there. So I could actually, I think I'll just give you an example now for this, see if that feels right. Yeah. So an example of where touch preparation, like where I noticed that like because of our long touch preparation, we were able to not cause harm where we otherwise I would have been harmful. And this just kind of shows like the benefits of having that long preparation. So had a client who I'm still seeing for ketamine therapy, transitioned to doing at-home cat sessions, but had experienced a lot of like, first we were like, we're going to do, I don't know, I think it was like something like 2 months worth of prep. And then we were going to dive in. In those 2 months of prep, a lot of stuff emerged, a lot of stuff surrounding touch and a lot of stuff surrounding like erotic, like transference towards me, which is a common thing that we could also spend a long time talking about. In that preparation, my client was asking for, like within the ketamine session, asking for like hand holding, hand on shoulder. And I had also offered, because of like, psychedelic therapists will often work with the extremities, hands, feet. Holding the feet can be a really powerful thing. And I offered that I hold their feet. And we'd practice some of the touch, like we'd practice the like hand on shoulder in non-psychedelic sessions. We practice the holding hands. And then as we got it closer and closer to the ketamine session, my client told me that they actually have a sexual relationship to having their feet touched. Right. And this was like maybe like I think 1 or 2 sessions before we were about to dive in. And I realized right then and there, we need to extend this. So we did another 2 months on top of for prep, because of that, just one statement. Oh, sometimes it's like kind of a sexy thing for me. Like it's kind of a sexual thing. Like I have like a foot thing, right? I'm like, oh, okay, we actually can't have that happen because there's no sexual energy will be chased in this, like in the container. So we worked with that, and we worked with like, what does that mean? How do we need to move our boundaries around? Like, what do I need? What do they need? And we decided to not go forward with touching the feet because of that reason. And so I named this because I think of what would have happened if we would have rushed through that process and I would have touched their feet during a 300 milligram ketamine session. What would have happened, right? And so there's an example. There's so much to say on this. Karina's also really good at this topic.
Yeah, let's hear from you, Karina.
It's a topic that we could talk about for hours and hours, because of the nature of touch and how beautiful and poignant and powerful touch can be. So, Danielle makes a good point. As psychotherapeutic clinicians, we are taught to rarely, if not ever, touch our clients. And so moving into touch in psychedelic therapy has been quite the shift for me. I think it's really important that the facilitator is familiar with their own relationship with touch. I personally love to touch. I'm a hugger. I love to be in physical contact with people. It's one of my love languages. So I know that about myself. And given that I now have permission and that it's part of the kind of spoken and overt contract in the room, I have to be aware of why I am touching. And so many of us as clinicians are familiar with the acronym WAIT, why am I talking? In psychedelic psychotherapy, we should be asking every single session, why am I touching? And so the way that I preface this, and when we're talking about therapeutic touch, and we absolutely are talking about it during our preparation sessions, is I say, I will not touch you unless you ask me and request touch. And then we go over what touch is like. Like as Danielle said, in psychedelic psychotherapy, we stick to the large joints. So we practice that. What does it feel like for you to receive therapeutic touch from me? What does it feel like for you to withdraw therapeutic touch from me? So we might practice a handhold. There's this particular kind of handhold that we use in psychedelic psychotherapy. We typically don't interlock the fingers so as not to become a part of their journey, but rather to provide support. And then we practice withdrawal of touch. And we talk about touch. We talk about their history of touch. What does touch feel like coming from me? Certainly we talk about things like erotic transference. So there's so much beautiful material here with the concept of touch. And at the end of the day, what is most important is that we are providing touch with the permission of the participant for the benefit of the participant.
Yeah, and you've touched on another maybe important element, and this could also be probably a webinar of its own, which is helping the client create that boundary to say no or to withdraw that consent for touch at any time, which is sometimes hard for folks. Real quick, what are some practical alternatives to touch?
One that I'm using a lot is like having like a pillow where you're like putting pressure on the pillow together and you're able to feel that pressure. Another is just like physical closeness. So you could like move your chair closer to the client, or oftentimes I'm getting out of my chair and I'm like on the floor while the client is like laying down. And you're also slowing that down completely. Like as you're trying the chair thing, that's like pre-touch prep is like, what does it feel like when I'm this close? What about this close? And it's nauseating, but great. It needs to be like molasses slow in order for you to catch all of those details. Yeah.
Anything to add, Karina?
So I will use co-regulation of breath. We'll practice that in the session. What does it feel like for you to breathe at this rhythm, at this tempo with me close to you? And then we'll teach self-touch. So what is it like to give yourself supportive touch? It can be really transformative to teach a person who has never utilized self-touch, self-holding, self-massage. So we're actually teaching people to regulate themselves as well.
Yeah, thank you. So we have a few more minutes here. I think I'd like to hear a little bit about how you gauge readiness of the client during preparation? And I'm using term flags here. So green flags, yellow flags, red flags. And how might you adapt that preparation process based on sort of what you're finding from clients? And Karina, if you'd like to start, that would be great.
So I introduced the idea of a sacred yes. What I mean when I say sacred yes is that the participant has had all of their questions answered, that we've completed the informed consent process, that they have all of the logistical information, and that they can look me in the eye and say, I'm ready to move forward tomorrow with this session. And as a clinician with a good amount of experience, I can gauge that. Like, we're good here. We're ready to go. We're never going to feel 100%, but we're ready to go. So they feel properly informed. I feel like the trust and rapport has been built. They have an idea of who I am. I have an idea, a good idea of who they are. I'm clear about their intentions, and I'm clear about their history such that I feel ready to move forward. So that would be a green flag. Danielle, you want to talk about your green flags?
Those are, you know, I'll focus on the red flags.
Okay.
Yeah.
How about,
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Danielle, with red flags.
Sure. Yeah. Cause I'm like, yeah, these are the green flags are like, I would say, well, the red flags are almost like easier to note, and they're pretty specific for me, which are like, okay, so one of them is like drug seeking behavior, or like sort of like the hungry ghost, like I need to have this experience, like this is going to be the thing that like that heals me, or like, yeah, just like this rushing of the process. That's something that I'm totally paying attention to. Another one is like any like mania or psychosis, right? So it's like, ooh, if we're kind of in a place where you're able to get to this without a psychedelic experience, and we want to really tend to what's possible if you were to have this in a psychedelic experience. So we're sort of testing for that and the patterns of that. And then I think I'd say like the yellow flag is probably like heavy erotic transference, like at the beginning. Like it's something you can work with, but it's like something to pay attention to. Like, is this relationship going to be helpful, supportive, or do we need to change the relationship? Same thing with any other like transference that occurs. I've had clients who are like, you know, heavy projections around like, wow, you look just like my mom, or you have the same name as my ex-therapist. It's like, there's so many things like that where it's like, if we don't have the time to like work with the relational aspects, because we can't have that 6 months to a year, then like we do need to figure this out, you know? So yeah, and green flags is everything Karina said, really.
Yeah, and Karina, any yellow or red flags for you?
You know, if a participant is too eager, in other words, I want to have this experience, I have to have this experience, this is going to be the experience that changes my life, those are absolute red flags for me. I know that it's time to slow down. It doesn't mean that we won't have the experience. It means that we need to you know, create some more space and use more time to develop a good relationship with the process. So, you know, anytime someone's too eager, or if someone's too aloof, I have a couple of examples of both if you want to get into that at some point, but, you know, somebody's not taking things seriously. So too eager, too anxious, or aloof are usually my red and yellow flags.
Yeah, and how might each of you, we only have a couple minutes left before we need to move into Q&A, but how would each of you sort of adjust that preparation process? You know, if there were a yellow flag, if there were a red flag, and maybe that can go into the instance that you're thinking about, Karina.
You know, I typically speak directly to it. So when I talk about radical honesty, I mean it. So we are practicing moving toward uncomfortable material in the preparation process, because I'm asking them to do that in the medicine sessions and in integration. And so if we have to get a little uncomfortable with each other, we're going to do it now. We're going to practice it. So I can give you a couple of examples of you know, a red flag, the red flags. And they're opposite ends of the spectrum. So I've had a participant who has come very, very eager, you know, come with 2 notebooks, a list of questions, you know, pen and paper, and just, you know, asking question after question after question, and almost interrupting the process and the flow of what I know to be a healthy preparatory process. And so at that point, what I had to tell this participant is, you seem to have a lot of questions that you want answered. Your nervous system seems overstimulated. It's hard for you to regulate even in this session. I don't feel comfortable moving forward. they were very angry and very upset and almost forewent treatment. But what I explained to them is, we're in a relationship. It's not just us. We're also introducing the relationship of the medicine with you, with us, into the room. And so if I don't feel comfortable and you don't feel comfortable, the chances of this being a beneficial experience for you are very low. And so in my professional opinion, we need to slow down. And so we slowed down. We spent a couple of additional sessions. We spent one, and I insisted on two. This was not easy. You would think that someone who is really eager to have this experience would be the ideal participant, but it wasn't. And so we spent 2 additional sessions. We slowed down. We had the benefit of doing that. And then they had a really good experience. The other is kind of the other end of the spectrum. I like to tell the story of a participant who canceled their first preparation session, postponed the reschedule. And then finally, when we got to the preparation session, was kind of like out of breath and sweaty. And I said, where are you? They didn't, weren't even properly clothed, and let me know that they were in the parking lot of the gym, and they had kind of like decided to do this preparation session in between sets. And I thought, okay, this feels weird. So, kind of went into it against my instinct. We started the preparation process, started my spiel, and, they were looking around, answering, talking to other people. And I kind of checked in, like, are you listening to what I'm saying? Can you tell me, what are we talking about here? I feel ready. I'm ready to go. I don't need to hear this. And I was like, nope, we're not doing this. So these are, extremes of the red flags that we might see.
Yeah. And Danielle, anything to add there?
No, just that I'm like, I see clients like that too. And it's a tricky one to be kind of like a gatekeeper sometimes in the work, and it can make people really upset. But that's one of the like responsibilities in this role that, it's worth it, just to like, otherwise all that material gets projected onto you, and it could be harmful to them. So yeah.
See a webinar all about boundaries in our future. Mm-hmm. Final thoughts before we go into Q&A. What's your philosophy on how preparation influences outcomes in therapy?
The longer, the better. What's coming up for me is my siblings, honestly. I've known my older brother my entire life. And we still find these moments of tension where we're like, where is this coming from? And look, we've had all the prep. I've worked with him to like help him initiate his own healing through medicine experiences. And the stuff that even comes up in those is like, we've had lifelong preparation and still, right? So that's the longer, the better.
It's the beginning of a really sacred relationship, no matter how long or short term the relationship is. And so in the ways that we can create a safe, strong, balanced foundation, we are, it is our responsibility to do so. We will find that anywhere that we skimped, anywhere that we, kind of went past our instinct, anywhere that there was wiggle room, the wiggles will find their way in there, right? So we want to make sure that in all ways possible, we have done our best to create a sound, safe, loving, and ethical foundation for the work that we're about to do together.
Thank you both so much. We're going to move into the Q&A part right now. I'm sure I'll put in the chat. Please raise your hand or pop your question into the chat. Either way will work. And we have a question here. This one's for Karina. Karina, how are you able to work with all the psychedelics openly in California? And then they wondered what that name of your institute is again.
Yeah, so I have to admit, I'm incredibly privileged and honored to be able to do this type of work. And I do it through legal clinical trials here in Los Angeles at Pacific Neuroscience Institute. So the name of the clinic that I work in within that institute is called TRIP, Treatment and Research in Psychedelics. And, we're a clinical research organization. We do initiate investigator trials as well as sponsored studies. And so we're able to work with these medicines for a very particular mental health condition.
Thank you. Next question is, could you expand on the signatures of different substances? And either one of you who feels compelled, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I brought up the term signature, so I'm happy to talk a little bit about it. So the signature of anything, we have our own particular signatures, right? It's kind of our personalities, how we show up in the world. And the medicines have their own personalities and ways that they show up. In my opinion, they also have their own intentions. But so the signature of a medicine, so for example, if I'm describing the signature of ketamine, I might tell a participant, well, ketamine is a dissociative anesthetic. And so what you will probably feel from this medicine is its desire to take you away from your body, from the feelings in your body first, from the room, maybe from your emotions, and eventually your identity, and even maybe your consciousness. Some people report that with ketamine, they feel like a single point of consciousness. And so I'm describing kind of the personality or the signature of ketamine. This is the nature of this particular medicine. If I were describing psilocybin, I would describe it very differently, right? So whereas ketamine might take you further away from yourself or from a problem in order to give you perspective, I would describe psilocybin differently. Psilocybin often brings you closer to a problem or to yourself or to your history. And so we talk about it in terms of like personality or signature.
Yeah, thank you. And in a world where all of these were readily available to folks legally, how would you, are there certain substances or certain medicines you would recommend for certain kinds of presenting issues? Either one of you.
Yeah, I love Karina's use of the word signature. I think that's totally appropriate. I always talk to my clients about the different spirits of the medicines that enter the room. They have personality structures, and those personality structures are informed by like literally their chemical composition, but also they have a cultural identity that they come into the room with. They carry histories and ancestors the way we do, right? So that to be aware of that presence, and then your relational like aspects to that presence. So I would say like different medicines for different qualities or things you're trying to work with. Just say what's on the top of my head. That dissociative psychedelic anesthetic quality of ketamine is really powerful for folks who are experiencing like a treatment-resistant depression, suicidal ideation place. One of the reasons why, and this is just from my own experience in doing ketamine-assisted work mostly, is that when somebody really is like, I don't want to be here, I want out of this, I want to just get like that like death urge, for the medicine to pull you out of your body, and then you're feeling that for a moment, it's sort of like a practice of death. It's a lot. It can feel like really intense, and oftentimes I've seen clients come back from that experience and be like, wait, what I realize is that I do want to be here. I want to be in my body. I would like to stay there. I like it there, so that's been incredible. Also, it has this quality of like heart opening and heart expansiveness, so that there's like a reflection of your own like self-love. Whereas something like MDMA is going to be really heart opening and expansive, but very interconnected and interpersonal and intimate. So really great for something like couples work or even self-work. It's great for PTSD. It cracks open. I do MDMA assisted therapy too. We're just waiting for that legally. But it has this capacity to like really take your trauma and help you see it from like a 360 perspective. All of a sudden, the narrow focus sort of breaks down, and then you're able to kind of carry it. And yeah, there's so many other things for so many other medicines, but I think Karina could really speak to that from her studies.
So you hear how Danielle can articulate so well her relationship with these medicines, right? Why is that? It's because she has a good amount of experience working with them, and she may have her own personal experience with these medicines. So, Deb, when you ask this question, the scientist inside of me perks up and says, hey, we don't know. We are just figuring this out, right? So, we are so privileged to stand on the shoulders of giants who were able to do this work earlier scientifically, but we're also standing on the shoulders of thousands of years of ancestral and indigenous communities who were working with these medicines. And so the wisdom and the intelligence actually lies there. That's really where we should be looking. We are now, there's this new study of these medicines. And so my initial answer is we just don't know. But you can see as we are developing closer and respectful relationships with these medicines, we're starting to find out what their signature and what their personalities are like. And so we can make some educated guesses about how we might be able to help certain conditions. So, I agree with what Danielle says in terms of ketamine and MDMA. But the truth is that people might have to develop their own relationships with these medicines. And certainly we as a scientific and clinical community have to develop respectful relationships with these medicines so that we can find out exactly the answers to these questions. And that's what we're doing here. That's one of the reasons that we're working above ground and working in clinical research and really trying to establish safety and efficacy of these medicines, because it's important and they have a tremendous amount of healing potential.
Yeah, thank you both. And we'll take a hand now. Lena, if you want to go ahead and unmute and let us know what your question is.
Hi, thank you. This has been so illuminating. Thank you so much. My question is very broad in scope and has to do with training. So I am not a licensed therapist, nor do I ever intend to become one. I am a certified life coach, but I'm feeling very strongly pulled to developing retreats out in countries where psilocybin use, for instance, is allowed, to be a capable, ethical, highly skilled guide. How do I begin? Where do I find a training for being a guide, but not in the therapeutic sense? Or does therapy-based ones apply too? Are they better?
Yeah. I can speak to that. And then Karina and Danielle, if you have anything to add. So in our psychedelic assisted therapy course, it is for licensed mental health professionals. We're in the process of developing another course that'll be a sort of shorter course that's easy to access all online. That's about psychedelic care. And so anyone who would fall into that spectrum of care, which is sort of what you're talking about, that should be available this fall or early next year. In the meantime, there are a couple of volunteer organizations that do offer training. So one of those is Fireside, and they'll offer training to the folks who volunteer on that hotline. And then sure, I'll pop in and what's the name of the other one that you're associated with?
The Zendo Project, which helps to teach a harm reduction approach and how to sit with people in psychedelic crises.
Yeah, and those are great places to start. And Danielle and Karina, you may have other things to add.
Fireside and Zendo are what I was going to suggest. I would also suggest it's very important for all of us as facilitators. And my personal opinion is that we need armies of people who are ethical and well-trained in their respective roles. So it's very important that we're working within our scope of practice, irrespective of what our approach is, right? If you are hoping to help people with mental health conditions, you should probably partner with somebody who has a good amount of experience with mental health conditions. If you're hoping to work outside of the country, my sincere plea would be that you work with people who have been using these medicines, the indigenous communities that have been using these medicines for the healing of their communities for thousands of years. So that you're really partnering with people who have experience, who understand the depth and the breadth of this work. I am still doing that. I will be a student forever of this work. I have a teacher and will continue to learn and continue to be trained. I just came back from a training last week. It's very, very important that we are maintaining a good amount of education, and we feel very, very stable. And we're working within our scope of practice.
Thank you.
Thank you
we have time for 2 more questions. Is there a guide for preparation? Any recommended resources from either of you?
My instinct is to say no, because if we focus on having a guide, then we're going to miss a lot. This is one of those things that reminds me of mysticism. You can't just read about it. You have to experience it. And yeah, so I would say, like, yeah, I've actually used the Tibetan Book of the Dead before in preparation sessions, but so much of what I'm doing is it's intuitive. It's based off of like experience. It's been really painful to get to the place that I'm in based off of a lot of like rupture, and then needed to repair. So it's like a refinement of skills. Nothing can replace practice.
Yeah, and you're really speaking to the co-creation process, right? All through the entire psychedelic assisted therapy experience. One final question. Can you speak to the religious spiritual preparation for participants? And how is the clinician participant relationship held from that perspective?
I would ask the participant what their spiritual or religious approach is. If they're asking me about my particular spiritual or religious approaches, I would be happy to share that with them, with the caveat that these are mine, and these are my approaches, and that I've studied inside of these lines for many years. I'm not sure if they want, some education around some of the more indigenous practices. We can talk about things like dietas. We can talk about things like making sure that you have the proper support, or maybe seeking out the support of your own spiritual community. But it's a broad topic. We can talk broadly about spiritual preparation. I think if somebody didn't have a spiritual foundation, I would start with ceremony and ritual.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that we'll touch on this more in our upcoming webinars, but there's this element of ontological shock, particularly around spirituality, that can happen. And then what do you do with that when it shows up, and how do you navigate that as a therapist? And so we'll get to that in future webinars. We'll stop here and move on to the next segment. Danielle, Karina, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us. It's been fantastic to be able to have this conversation with you. We appreciate both of you so much. And
yes, thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for staying through to the end of our conversation. In the last 10 minutes, we're just going to go over a little bit about our upcoming fall cohorts, of which Danielle and Karina are our faculty members. So I'll do a quick introduction of the Foundations of Psychedelic Assisted Therapy course. So as Deb mentioned, this course is available for people who are licensed mental health practitioners or practicing already from an indigenous or religious context. The course is spread out over about 6 months. It's 76 credit hours. It's a combination of doing Zoom classes together with your facilitators, and then also working in small communitas pods where you'll have an opportunity to have practice groups in a small setting. And then there's prep work that happens on your own time before classes. Our fall cohorts are starting October 9th. And so to join us for that, we ask you to apply and fill out an application. And myself and Kabir are available to do one-on-one phone conversations with you if you have questions about eligibility or how you might integrate this training into your practice. We're more than happy. So we'll drop some links into the chat where you could schedule a follow-up call with us, and we'll also drop a link into the chat for the course itself. And then I'm going to invite Deb back to just go over a little bit more about our educational approach and some of the things that you might learn over the course of the 6 months.
Yeah, thank you. And whoever's on the slides, next slide, please. So some of the theories and methodologies that we've used, we've got psychological approaches, because there's sort of this coming together of psychology, education, and theory. And so we've got psychological approaches, including psychoanalytical, psychodynamic. We have a very in-depth focus on somatic therapies as well throughout the course, and transpersonal and relational work. There's a little bit of developmental theory in there as well. In terms of educational theories, we really create our courses to be learner-centered and constructivist. And so we realize that all of you come with a wealth of experience of your own, and we're really co-creating, what the classroom looks like. So we're bringing in all of your knowledge as well as the knowledge of our faculty to really create a dynamic and applicable course and learning experience. Our learning is embodied, meaning that we are not just teaching to your mind, we're teaching to your whole organization of experience, creating experiences for you that help you deepen into emotional elements and somatic elements that are related to the learning of this work. And it's also relational. We know that learning happens in relationship. We know that therapy also happens in relationship. And we try to build those relationships as much as possible. You can read those featured theorists there. Some of you were asking sort of guides. I would recommend Kylie Taylor's book, The Ethics of Caring, as a beginning place. It's one of the required texts in our course. And then let's go to the next slide, please. So in terms of course content, it's divided over 7 modules, including the orientation. Really, the orientation is about communitas, liminality, really creating that container. And in a lot of ways, the learning process parallels the therapy process here. So you start with building a strong container, checking resources, really building resources. Module 1 is about establishing intentional practice. So we're talking about ethical care, right relationship, really what the therapeutic, the elements of therapy, right? And so you've got the therapist, you got the medicine, and you've got the client, and all within these bigger systems. Module 2, we're really looking at indigenous and historical uses of psychedelics, ceremony, mental models, and belief systems. We're starting to think about, even from the beginning, what it means to practice from a decolonizing perspective in this work. Module 3 is about contemporary use, research of psychedelics, and also the limitations of research. Module 4, we deepen back into sort of the ethics, and this time we're looking at power dynamics in that therapeutic relationship. We're looking at transference, countertransference, shadow work, and really looking at self and the sort of what's within the locus of control of the therapist within the psychedelic assisted therapy experience. Module 5 is unique in that it mirrors preparation, holding space, and transformation, like this webinar series that we're doing. There's a cacao experience, so you get to practice those elements of preparation, elements of holding space, and also integration together in a shared experience with cacao, which is a sort of heart-opening medicine. And then finally, in Module 6, we're looking at establishing a community of practice, clinical applications, closing the container, emotions, at transformation and integration and closing as well, and sort of how to navigate those. And I'm not sure if there's another slide. Some of our fantastic contributors, they're not all on here. And that's it. And we'd be happy to stay and answer any questions you have specifically about our courses.